today. So thank you for your attendance. Let me introduce myself. I'm the Vice President of Presales for 8K Miles, and my specialty here is identity and access management. So the subject of this particular presentation today is EzIAM, or IAM made easy, and it's focusing on our identity and access management, or identity as a service solution that's hosted out of the Amazon Web Services cloud. Just a little bit of instructions here. You'll find that there is an opportunity to type in your questions on the right-hand side. A little bit of housekeeping there. So type in your questions at any time, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll go through the questions in the order received, and depending upon time, we'll answer all of them if we can. Other than that, I think we're fairly good to go. So let me kick it off. So I'd like to begin by talking about just introducing you to 8K Miles. So 8K Miles is really a blend of two centers of excellence. One is focused around identity and access management, and so it's clearly the focus of this particular webinar. But the other one is focused on migration of applications from on-premise to the cloud. Now with that, we have four main areas of focus. The first one that you see here on the screen is our core intellectual property. So we're not just kind of a reseller of identity and access management technology. We've also built our own technology. We have our own IP that's been built specifically to streamline the effort involved in building out identity federations. So we found a lot of customers have problems in doing identity federation. So we built some intellectual property to help make that easier. So using this technology, we have validated and certified hundreds of SaaS partner federations, and so our EzIAM solution gets the benefit of that, as do our on-premise federation customers as well. So the next is our consulting arm. As you might imagine, we've got over 7 years of experience in the IAM space, and we built a very, very strong consulting arm that covers all aspects of identity and access management, from on-premise deployments, custom developments and implementations, as well as managed services, where we run and operate identity and access management stacks for our customers, both in their own private cloud as well as in the public clouds that we all know and love, such as Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure. The third is really the topic of this presentation. That's our EzIAM solution. And then finally, last but not least, is our Application Migration Center of Excellence. And that does everything from consulting and architecture through to implementation and full managed services in the major clouds, AWS, Google, Azure, OpenStack, etc. So these four buckets represent our key core competencies, and that's just as a frame of reference for anybody in the audience there. And as I said, today we're focusing on the third pillar, which is EzIAM. So let's talk a little bit about EzIAM, and let's start with the problems that it solves. So as I'm sure you're all aware, Identity and Access Management, or IAM, has been around for many, many years in the form of on-premise products from companies such as CA Technologies, Oracle, Ping, IBM, etc. It was originally designed or developed to address a security need, to enable the right individuals access to the right resources at the right times for all the right reasons. And initially, this was before the advent of many of the regulatory compliance mandates that we know and love today, such as HIPAA, SOX, and PCI. So if we break that down and focus on the business problems, we see that today, not much has really changed, with the exception of a big compliance driver for companies in regulated industries. However, a big dynamic has come into play in the form of the cloud. So really what we're trying to say here is that those initial set of business requirements have not changed much, but the cloud has now entered the scene and gives us an opportunity to do more with less. So going back to kind of the history of IAM and especially the on-premise IAM, why has that been so hard? Why are we looking at cloud as potentially being an alternative to the traditional method of consuming IAM, which is to deploy it within your own data center? Well, you can read this slide as well as I can, but essentially it's highly complex technology. This stuff is not for the faint of heart. I've seen implementations that have literally taken 2 to 3 years, and I've seen some implementations that have failed after that amount of time. So depending upon the complexity, these things are not that easy to do if you tackle it yourself. It can be very, very slow to demonstrate good ROI. So over a long period of time, as you might imagine, the business is looking for progress. They're looking for evidence that this thing is actually giving them good business value. And so depending upon the technology, depending upon the complexities and how you roll this stuff out, it could be 6 months, a year before you see any tangible benefits, by which time you kind of lose faith with the BUs. They lose, you lose credibility. They're not seeing the benefits, and so very often these projects kind of die on the vine. Also, the ongoing care and feeding is costly. With complex technology like this, with multiple solutions that typically get deployed on premise, this stuff is going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to take a lot of investment from a resource perspective, both to run and operate this infrastructure, as well as to educate the people necessary to keep it up and running. These people tend to command a huge salary. Things like SAML and Federation, again, it's a highly paid discipline. And I'm hearing people maybe join a company, and then within a year, they're moving on to another opportunity that pays them more money, and the original organization has lost that value. They've lost the education. They're having to hire somebody else, maybe get them educated, or pay a huge premium for the skill set so that they can continue their IAM operations in an efficient way. Also, within the enterprise, change tends to be a constant. So, you've got internal users, you've got maybe contractors, you've got external customers, you've got lots of different types of users that may evolve. You have different types of applications, some of them on-premise, some of them in the cloud, and that's continually evolving. If you're a larger shop, you have your own IT infrastructure, that tends to evolve as well, with new components added and others taken away. And also software upgrades and mergers may come into play, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these really have a huge impact on why identity and access management has been considered so hard to do on-premise, but it's a necessary evil. It's required for security, it's required for efficiency, it's required for regulatory compliance. And so, companies have had to do this. So what does the cloud bring us that we didn't really get with the on-premise approach to IAM? Well, in this slide, we see some of the main features of cloud computing. And these features provide us with value that is very, very hard to match in an on-premise context. So, you look at the list here, there's the 5 aspects about the cloud being a service-based or a service-oriented type of approach that can be consumed externally. It tends to be scalable and elastic, and so it can scale up to meet your own particular needs. If you have increasing needs, if your throughput or your transaction rates or your number of users increases, then you have the ability of scaling up that infrastructure, scaling up those services to react very, very quickly to those demands. And alternatively, if things scale down or if requirements decrease, then you can scale downwards in an elastic fashion. So the goal there is you're really only paying for what you need, and you're not having lots of compute power and storage and networking resources sitting around idle doing nothing, but yet you've invested in those technologies. You also have the shared aspect. So one of the reasons why this can be very economical in general is because you're amortizing the cost, or the vendor, the service provider, is able to amortize the cost of the service across multiple tenants. So in a shared multi-tenant environment, you get the benefit of that economically. It's metered by use. So the old on-premise approach to having a perpetual license, where you literally own that technology for the rest of its existence, and you pay for that with with a big license cost up front, and then you kind of pay annual maintenance. That's different in the cloud, obviously, because what we're offering there is the ability to license this almost as a lease on an as-needed basis. So the number of licenses increases or decreases as your users increase or decrease. So you're metered by use, per user per month. And then finally, internet technologies. I mean, we have the ability as a vendor of these services within the cloud to leverage the best of the internet technologies available as the underlying infrastructure. And as those evolve and we can bring better efficiencies, better cost savings, better functionality to the table, we can bring in those new technologies, and that all becomes transparent to the subscribers of the service. So this is all pretty good stuff just from a generic cloud perspective. Economies of scale, where your cost per unit can drop significantly due to that shared environment. Reduced spending for you on technology infrastructure, since most or if not all of it will reside off premise. Other things as well, like globalizing your workforce through the internet connection. So with this stuff in the cloud, there isn't a single user within your workforce who couldn't conceivably get access to these services. So it becomes a globalization thing for you. Reducing your CapEx so that you can just spend OpEx dollars on subscribing to the service. Improving accessibility. There's a whole laundry list of benefits here. Anytime, anywhere access. We mentioned about the subject matter expertise necessary to run something like IAM on premise. Well, reduced training and SME operational overhead is another benefit of having this in the cloud, where a vendor such as 8K Miles can run and operate this on your behalf. And finally, again, there's probably more of these, but avoiding lock-in, giving you the flexibility to change direction more easily than if you were to spend millions of dollars on having this implemented within your own data center, let's say, and you're kind of locked into that because of the investment. Okay. So with that kind of backdrop, I'd like to just pop out a quick poll, if I can actually access. Just bear with me one second. I'd like to throw out a quick poll here and ask the audience a question. So just give me 1 second to pop up a poll. So the poll here, basically, hopefully you can see this on your screen. It kind of asks the question, how many of you are using identity and access management? And you have the option, it's multiple choice, so you can actually pick multiple answers to this. You're either already using a commercial identity as a service solution, maybe you're already using one on premise and you're going to stick with it. The third option is that it's on the roadmap, and you're looking to sign up within 6 months and get something on board. It's on the roadmap, and maybe you have a 12-month window to get an identity as a service implemented, or it's not planned. So I'll just wait for about a minute just for the attendees to vote on that. Okay, we'll just give it another 10 seconds before we close the poll. All right, so we have that closed. So it looks as though, from the results, we have about 20% already have an on-premise solution, and it looks as though you're sticking with that. We have another 20% which is not planned, and then the resulting 60% have it on the roadmap, split between 6 months and 12 months. So I think the conclusion there is that for those that already have it, you're probably looking around at the cloud-based offerings to see what the maturity is, to see what kind of capabilities that they offer today, see how it's evolving. But for the majority of the attendees, it looks as though you're planning to go the route of an identity as a service, certainly within the next 12 months. So that was interesting. Okay, so let's move back then to the presentation then, and let me just clear this off my screen. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so let's talk some more then about EzIAM, and let's talk about the key business values specifically that EzIAM is intended to solve. So in the first slide, we spoke about the business drivers in general haven't changed, and so let's drill down a little bit on those. So cost reduction is a big thing that we hear from our customers. And for those of you, by the way, working on your own identity as a service business plans, you can use this slide in your own decks maybe to help validate and capture some of those drivers yourself for your own presentations. So, you know, note that as we go through this, that there are benefits to cloud-based IAM as a discrete service, implementing IAM functionality. And then there are those benefits that are very, very specific just to leveraging the cloud as an infrastructure as a service mechanism, if you will, such as reducing infrastructure costs and operational overheads. But what we're going to focus on in these slides are those benefits that are very, very specific to IAM as a discipline within the cloud. So cost reduction. So there's a lot of automation in EzIAM. That's probably one of the biggest things, is there's a lot of identity and access management related activities today that are manual. They take a lot of time. There's a lot of operational overhead. There's a lot of administrative overhead. And there's a lot of getting things wrong. And very much when it comes to looking at things like users and entitlements and roles and who has access to what, it's a case of having to pull together spreadsheets, maybe from different people, just to really figure out what that landscape looks like. So automating this process and having a centralized pane of glass through which you can see it and manage it is a real big key. The automation usually translates into massive cost reductions as well. We have things like workflow-based approvals. So when somebody requests access to a particular resource, let's say, or a particular application, then we can have the automation of an approval process through workflow, where a manager may get an email, they come into the portal, they see this request in their task list, and they approve it or deny it, as the case may be. But the point being that we're automating this process, we're taking a lot of the manual intervention out of it. And so that translates into certainly reduced cost from an IT perspective. There's also automation in the form of things like onboarding users very, very quickly and provisioning their accounts to multiple applications that they need to do their job. And as we all know, onboarding users can take days or weeks, depending upon how you do it and how many systems you have available for your users. And so by automating that, we can cut that down to a matter of literally minutes. Obviously, if there's workflow-based approvals that need to factor in there, then it can take a bit longer until those people actually come into the system and do the actual approval. But we're really significantly cutting down the effort. And the nice thing there is, from an IT perspective, you no longer need to email an administrator to say, please create an account on that Unix box or in that Salesforce.com application for this new employee. And you also don't need to focus so much on the entitlements, because in a role-based model, all of their entitlements and their group memberships are inherent in that role, and so that automatically gets deployed with it. Another key business value of EzIAM is improving security. So this goes way back to the original rationale for having identity and access management in the first place, before regulatory compliance kind of bubbled to the surface, and we'll come to that. So obviously we're dealing with identities. Identities or users need to access resources. They need to be authenticated. They need to be granted access only to the resources that their job demands of them. And there tends to be, without a solution like this, without the automation and there tends to be this thing called privilege creep. So as security practitioners, we all like to try and ensure that least privilege is a tenet of security that gets enforced. So I will only have the minimum amount of access to the stuff I need to get my job done and no more. But over the years, privilege creep has crept in. So somebody new joins the company, and it's left up to one or more administrators to say, well, what should this person have access to? Well, Tony is doing the same role as Joe over there, so let's give that person the same kind of roles, even if they're not quite applicable. So extra privileges might creep in that way. And then during my life cycle as an employee of the company, my role may change internally, and so maybe I get granted additional entitlements, additional accesses, additional accounts in more systems, but I don't get anything taken away. So there isn't that check and balance there to say, hang on a minute, his internal role has changed. We can give him more privileges, more accounts, but by virtue of his new job, we need to take those away. That typically has not happened. So that's part of the privilege creep equation. There's also segregation of duties as a big security influencer here. So, the old example of you shouldn't have the access of an accounts payable person as well as an accounts receivable. You shouldn't be able to authorize the creation of a check that pays you money. And there's lots and lots of other segregation of duties types of scenarios that come into play where we get these kind of toxic combinations that we need to accommodate. But that's very, very hard to do in a manual sense with multiple applications, multiple systems, maybe things like SAP that has its own concept of segregation of duties, and trying to marry that with other roles and other entitlements in non-SAP systems. So the ability to automate that, to bring it under control and management, helps improve overall security. Another big security thing that we hear is deprovisioning. In fact, deprovisioning is, we often hear that before provisioning as a means of getting people onboarded rapidly. And that's because it tends to play a big factor in regulatory compliance. So as soon as somebody leaves the organization, in a perfect world, we want to hit a button and ensure that all of the accounts on all of the systems that user was provisioned to have been deleted or at least disabled. And you can get a little bit creative on that. You could say things like, well, let's leave email open because they're not leaving until the end of the month, but these other key business systems, we want to disable their access so that we're mitigating the risks associated with them compromising those systems. Another way to improve security is with multi-factor authentication. So more and more now, we see that user ID and password is just insufficient. So wouldn't it be nice if we could introduce a second factor to improve security, to mitigate risks for those applications that we deem as an organization require that extra level of security? And then finally, we have here risk-based fraud detection. So that might take multi-factor to another level. So typically, we're just talking about the person who is knocking on the front door to say, hey, I'm Tony, please let me in. But with risk-based fraud detection, we can take that to the next level, which is we can be kind of monitoring certain transactions. And if we see activity by a user that goes outside of a set of norms that we identify within our policies, then the risk factor can be increased, and that could prompt or trigger, let's say, a second factor to be introduced to the user so that we can really determine that they are who they say they are. And we'll talk about a little bit more about those risk-based fraud detection capabilities in the slides that we have coming up. So improve user productivity. So that kind of goes without saying for a lot of this stuff. One of the biggest ones is the rapid account access and provisioning. So when a user joins the company, you really want that user to be productive from day one. And so the ability to onboard them to the applications that they need to get their job done is critical. And I mentioned earlier that you may have workflow where approvals kick in, and that's fine. But with an automated solution such as this, you can really cut down what might be a matter of weeks of getting users access to their resources. You may be able to cut that down to literally a matter of hours. So productivity increases. They immediately get access to what they need to get their job done. They're productive from day one. Other areas of user productivity are things like single sign-on. So we're finding more and more of our customers are signing up and subscribing to SaaS-based applications. And we're not talking about 2 or 3. We're talking dozens now. Dozens is the norm. And we have some customers who have 50, 60, over 100 external applications that they want to make available to their internal users for whatever reason. Some of those are commercial SaaS apps, like the traditional ones, like Salesforce and WebEx and ADP and all these common ones. More and more, we're seeing these sort of not mainstream SaaS applications. They're the smaller application service providers who, you know, they're not quite up there in the top level, but they're equally important to the business. Others are partners as well. You may have supply chain partners, business partners, who themselves expose web applications that can be consumed by your users. And so they're necessary just to keep the business going. And some of them may be mom and pop shops, but you still need to hook into these guys. And so if I'm a user and daily I want to access 5, 10, 20 of these applications, my productivity can be increased tremendously if I can be single signed on to that. So if I log in, let's say, to my local environment, to Active Directory, and then that login is honored, and the authentication and my credentials are federated over to those systems, and I can be immediately logged into them. So it saves me a lot of time and energy. Also in the form of having to remember my passwords. So we get additional security as a result of that, and we get better productivity. So finally, regulatory compliance. So you know, we have a lot of customers who come to us and say, look, we need to get a grip on this kind of stuff from multiple angles of IAM. Identity certification is one of them, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But basically, we want to avoid things like orphan accounts. So again, when people leave the organization, we'd like to hit a button and have the confidence knowing that these accounts have at least been disabled, if not deleted in their entirety, so that they're not left potentially open to compromise at a future time. And this holds true for both SaaS-based applications, as well as some of our customers want this for on-premise applications where they're in more of a hybrid cloud and on-premise mode. Reducing privilege creep, that's something that we mentioned early on about security. Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing as well. Least privilege. Only give users access to the resources they need to do their job. And as their roles change throughout the year, throughout their tenure with your company, you want to easily apply changes to that landscape by reassigning the role complement. So maybe you take a role away and you add a new one, or they're hierarchical and you make adjustments throughout the system. But the net is that their entitlements and their accounts are just in line with that, and that needs to be automated. Preventive segregation of duties. We mentioned SOD as a security thing, but being preventive in that is something that our customers are asking for. So if I'm a manager, excuse me, if I'm a manager and I log into EzIAM and I want to grant a new role to one of my users, one of my employees, it would be nice if the system said, well, hang on a minute, you can't do that because it's now a toxic combination. They already have this role over here, accounts payable, and if you want to assign them an accounts receivable role, then you're going to have a segregation of duties issue. And finally, improving privacy. So obviously, privacy and security are two very, very closely tied, consistent norms that you find with many compliance mandates. And so improving privacy of information through automation, through security controls is a big thing as well. So these are the 4 key areas of business values that were really front and foremost when we put EzIAM onto the roadmap. So what is EzIAM? EzIAM is powered by CA Technologies CloudMinder. So if you're familiar with CA Technologies, you will know that you know, these guys have been around for many, many years. CA Technologies is a 35-year-old company plus. They've been developing and maturing IAM solutions for the biggest global enterprises. And so as you can imagine, they have very, very stringent requirements around stability, performance, scale, security, and the capabilities of their identity and access management suite. So with that history and with that backdrop, EzIAM inherits all of these benefits of CA's CloudMinder solution. And it provides the strongest set of IAM capabilities consumed as a pure SaaS service from the cloud, or in a hybrid model if you have the need to integrate with on-premise applications and with user stores such as Microsoft Active Directory. EzIAM includes over 30 built-in connectors to commercial on-premise applications. And as we'll see later, it includes a unique wizard-driven tool that enables our customers to rapidly build provisioning connectors to other applications within their organization without the need to code. And that's a very, very important differentiator, because many other solution providers in the marketplace, they'll have a set of built-in connectors, but if you want to provision your users to applications that are not in that portfolio, you're typically having to develop using C or Java or some other language, and it can take weeks to build those connectors to your internal applications. Well, with our solution, it's literally within an hour. So here's a kind of the obligatory logical diagram of the main EzIAM service. As you'll see, it currently supports 3 services that can be subscribed to independently or in combination based on your specific needs. Actually, I tell a lie. There's 4 services with 1 on the roadmap. We'll drill down in the next set of slides into each of those individual components. But in summary, advanced authentication is there to protect access to applications that require that extra layer of security in the form of a second factor, such as a one-time password to your mobile phone. And as I mentioned earlier, for even more advanced security, it has that risk engine that can look at additional factors such as your IP address, your geolocation, and whether a user is following a typical behavior pattern. Identity lifecycle management, that's the service that provides you with that single pane of glass through which you can see and manage your users. So from the EzIAM portal, administrators can do the administrative work such as creating users and roles, and individual users can perform self-service tasks such as password resets, and they can request access to the applications that are supported through the portal. Then we have the single sign-on service, which is allows the users to use EzIAM as a single sign-on launchpad. So they can log in, they get to a launchpad, they can see icons that represent the applications that they have been granted access to, and they can click on those for single-click login to those applications without having to authenticate twice or multiple times. And then there's the identity governance. So this is a capability that really does 2 things. First of all, if you have on-premise applications, this is a hybrid solution. If you have on-premise applications and you want to gain greater visibility into the users of those applications, what roles they have, what entitlements they have, and you want to clean that up, you want to do kind of identity cleanup, then it will perform that function. And then you can use the cleaned up roles in the identity management side of the solution in order to apply those to your users. It also has a second function, which is identity certification. Many of our users said, look, it's great that we have all of these, the ability to manage users and their roles, but we want to do a quarterly certification or a weekly or a monthly or an annual certification. We would like to automate that. Currently, we're using spreadsheets. So we want to be able to start a certification campaign, have an email go out to the managers, have the managers come into the portal, give them a view of what users they have, what roles these users have, what entitlements they have, and give them the ownership and the opportunity versus IT of being able to say, yep, this is great for the next quarter, or no, this particular user has a slight change in role, so I'd like to take this role away and maybe add a different role, and have that reflected down at the endpoint so that those entitlements are adjusted automatically. So that's the identity governance capabilities. And you'll see then, if there is a hybrid requirement to reach down to the enterprise to provision to internal applications or to harvest information about users and the groups for an identity governance campaign. There's a very, very small footprint cloud gateway that we deploy on-premise to provide that link between the on-premise and the cloud. Okay. So that's kind of the high-level logical view of the components of EzIAM. The privileged user management component on the left is actually a roadmap element where we will be able to manage those privileged users like the root and the super user account. So EzIAM, the key business use cases then that each of those solves, and again, this is more of a takeaway slide, but it does the reverse of what we did earlier. It shows each of the services with what they actually do. And I'm going to skim through this fairly quickly because you can take this away and refer to it at your leisure. But there's the single sign-on service with its single sign-on and automation capabilities. Here's the advanced authentication service supporting multiple credentials and doing the risk-based adaptive authentication. Here's the identity management service, which is the user lifecycle management with the user self-service and the provisioning to and from the endpoints. And then finally, the governance service, which allows you to discover, manage, and analyze your users, groups, roles, and entitlements, and do periodic identity certification campaigns. So with that, I'd just like to throw up the second poll of the day and just basically ask the audience a question here. So let me just see if I can pull that up very quickly, if I can control my mouse. And the question here is, what EzIAM services and capabilities from the ones listed are of most interest to you? And I noticed there's actually an error in the poll. The governance is not included on there. So it has identity management, it has single sign-on, it has advanced authentication, and there's also a hybrid model, whether or not you have an interest in on-premise as well as cloud-based provisioning and integration. Oh, actually, I do. I have future integration with identity certification, so that is, in fact, in there. So let me launch that poll right now. So if you would kindly select what's relevant to you, we'll give this a minute for people to click and wake up. So I see some of the results coming in here. I'm already seeing identity certification, so that's cool. We are definitely seeing a trend where more and more people, basically I think we're the only service in the cloud there that really integrates identity certification with identity management. And so we're finding more and more of our customers are really, really keen on this capability. We've definitely got a number of people saying that the single sign-on service is a key thing. We find that to be kind of bread and butter. That's where a lot of our customers want to give their users that single launch pad of, and everybody does it. I mean, it's something that everybody has to do. Although one of the things that I'm going to mention is that we actually take things a little bit further than most of the other vendors, in that we have some intellectual property that helps us validate and certify those federations. Okay, we'll give it just a little bit more time. We've also got more coming in on the hybrid model, so it looks as though I was expecting more of the audience here to be really focusing on pure SaaS, but I see here that hybrids are creeping in here as well. So definitely we have some of you there with on-premise applications who recognize that you know, you can't do everything in the cloud, not yet. And so the ability to accommodate that hybrid model is a key driver. All right, we'll give it 10 more seconds and then I'll close the poll. I'm also seeing advanced authentication. And people are really starting to, you know, the risk-based authentication is starting to resonate with our customers quite strongly, so I'm not really surprised there. Okay then, so I've closed that poll. So thank you very much for that. That was very interesting. As I mentioned, identity certification and hybrid seem to top the list there. And then single sign-on is kind of table stakes for everybody. And multi-factor authentication comes after that, before identity management. So that's an interesting thing. So let's move on then to some of the screenshots of EzIAM. So So this is what EzIAM might look to a user logging into the service. So this can be skinned here, obviously, to have your own logo and your own look and feel. So this is just a user ID and password login. At your discretion, we can actually support additional authentication models such as social networking. So you'll see here we just have a sample of Facebook and an internal IDP as well as Google. So OAuth and OpenID-based credentials can be used as a means of authenticating into the service. And we also have the internal EzIAM advanced authentication tokens can be used here. One is called a PKI token, which is basically an X509-based certificate that can be dropped onto your desktop, and this can be done automatically and seamlessly for your users. The users who typically use a desktop type of model for their work. And with that in place, they can authenticate to this as well as other types of services like a VPN into the enterprise if they're remote. And they enter their username and password, so the metaphor remains the same, but really what they're entering in there is a PIN that's used to unlock this PKI-based token on their disk, and that provides a strong second factor that is authenticated against one of our servers in the cloud, and that will grant them access to the system. It's highly secure. It uses patented technologies that prevent man-in-the-middle attack, and their actual domain password is never used, so that's never transferred across the connection. So the password that they're entering, as I mentioned, is actually a PIN that's used to unlock the local PKI container. There's also OTP, so we could use our inbuilt one-time password that could be sent to a mobile phone, or maybe as a voice message that you would pick up and then enter into the UI in order to authenticate yourself with that second factor, or we could do a Q&A, for example. And all of those can be done with those risk factors that I mentioned earlier. If we wanted to switch that on, we could also be taking into consideration not only your second factor, but also your IP address, your location, and maybe even your behavior patterns, whether you're doing this within typical hours that we're used to you logging in, and other forms of behavioral factors as well. Here's another example here of where we might, on that previous screen, you'll see there are other links like forgotten username, forgotten password, as well as the ability to do self-registration. And so here's an example of where you might be trying to get your forgotten password. So you'd enter your username, you'd enter a captcha. We could even take you through a Q&A and do an OTP if necessary, so there's definitely flexibility there. And then once you enter the right information, we can create a new password for you. You could select your own password, so there's multiple ways of adjusting that password. This is an example of the Q&A. Here we're just selecting 3. We could have during registration, we could have the users enter their own Q&A, 3, 5, 10, as many as you want. And we could then do a random selection of questions that they would answer based upon that. Here's another example of a user. And here you see in the left-hand pane of the tasks that they can perform. Typically, a user will have a minimum set of tasks, and they're typically just the self-service tasks, such as the ability to change their password, access their profile, and update profile attribute information, as well as request access to other applications. And here we see that the user has been granted access to AWS Console, Google Apps, as well as Salesforce. So once they've authenticated into EzIAM by clicking on those icons, they will immediately be logged into the system using federated single sign-on. There may be other application icons, let's say to on-premise applications, if they're operating in this hybrid mode. Here's another example where we see an admin logging in, and really the difference that we're trying to show here is that there's a lot more capabilities that an administrator can perform, as you can see from the list in the left-hand pane. Here they can add and create users, they can add and create groups, they can add different application services, they can control access, they can assign roles, they can do a lot more. And again, this is hierarchical, so there are actually administrative roles which will dictate what an admin user is capable of doing within the system. So you may have an IT administrator, a security administrator, maybe a compliance auditor, and they could be granted different roles and given different capabilities within the system. Here's a profile management screen where we might see a user's profile. That's my ugly mug there, so please don't laugh, but there's an example of where I can add different attributes into my profile. And although we support predominantly the concept of roles, where roles are predefined and they would be assigned to a user so that that user gets access, we could also do dynamic roles and rules that could be based off attributes within the profile. So let's say your profile changes. Let's say that you move to a different division or a different organization or even a different location. We could actually trigger automatic role assignment based on changes to your attributes, such as when the city changes, or maybe where your title changes, or even your reporting manager changes. So there's a lot of flexibility in that service there. Okay. So, example of some of the shots of the service itself. We're coming up to 45 minutes to the hour. I want to leave 10 minutes for Q&A, and we've got some questions that have been rolling in, and I want to be able to address those. So I'm going to leave these predominantly for your benefit. What it does is I have 3 slides that drill down a little bit more on the fine-grained capabilities of each of the 3 services, the single sign-on capability. One thing I do want to point out here is the one halfway down that says pre-tested application support. We feel this is actually quite critical. We have out-of-the-box support for hundreds and hundreds of SAML applications, but there is one difference between our solution and the competition. And as you can see from this kind of quote, the soundbite that we took from Forrester, they actually produced a report that said, as a consumer of an identity as a service, you need to ask your vendor if they've thoroughly tested SaaS connectors, and not to be satisfied with stock vendor answers such as, well, we do SAML and they do SAML, therefore it should all work. Just because the provider says that they speak SAML, it really doesn't guarantee that your users will have a trouble-free single sign-on experience. And vendors have different interpretations of that specification of the SAML spec, and the configuration of the federation can be very, very complex and prone to mistakes. So one piece of intellectual property that 8K Miles has developed is a test platform. We automate the testing of these federations, and we certify the right configuration and apply that to our solution. CH Technologies actually contracted with us to test over 300 commercial SaaS federations so that they can provide their offering cloud-minded customers with the trust and confidence that they will work out of the box. So it's of no surprise that those same certified federations are available through EzIAM from 8K Miles, and we continue to add more and more every quarter. You know, basically, since federation is often the backbone of most organizations' identity as a service journey, our deep expertise in this area and this certification of those federations is a massive benefit. So here's the slide that talks about the identity management capabilities. Again, we will upload this to the website to make sure that it's available for download, and advanced authentication capabilities as well. Here's a little slide on the cost model, so that for those of you that are wondering, you know, how is this thing, how do we subscribe to this thing? Obviously, contact us, go to our website, you know, email the contacts at the end of this slide presentation. But there's no software license cost. There's a minimal hardware cost if you're in the hybrid model and we need to deploy that little gateway. If not, and it's pure SaaS, then there's no hardware cost at all. It's all in the cloud. There's no hosting or data center cost. There's no solution maintenance cost because we manage all of that. There's no day-to-day administration cost. Pricing is per user per month, and each of those 3 services is, you can subscribe to those individually. You get a discount for multi-year subscriptions. So if you sign up for 1 year, it's a certain price. If you sign up for 2, you get a discount. If you sign up for 3 years, you get a bigger discount. If there are any customizations, we can do that as professional services, and that will be fixed fee. So none of this time and materials rubbish. We have a lot of confidence in our knowledge of the space, and unlike traditional resellers, we have domain expertise very deep in IAM, so we're confident with doing fixed fee professional services for that work. There are complementary offerings that don't form a part of the suite. They're kind of adjacent to this, but we can make them available as dedicated instances for our customers hosted in the AWS cloud. Things like CA SiteMinder, Identity Minder, Layer 7 for API security, as well as Governance Minder for identity certification. So we have a lot of capabilities in those areas. And finally, this is just a partial list of our certified SaaS partners. Again, emphasis on the word certified. They've been thoroughly tested, and we guarantee the interoperability with those through EzIAM. So basically, here are a summary of the differentiators that we feel are important to call out between ourselves and other vendors that do identity as a service. We are a premier CA Technologies partner, so we are very well versed in their technologies, and their technology that underpins ours has been around for many, many years and thoroughly tested in the biggest of enterprise scenarios. We solve the widest set of IAM use cases, not just single sign-on, but identity management, identity governance, multi-factor authentication, risk-based authentication, and we're adding more such as privileged identity management down in our portfolio, as well as the hybrid model. We have the broadest consumer base, so we can accommodate the smallest of SMBs all the way up to the largest of enterprises. We have the most aggressive pricing, so without giving it away, we will aggressively provide our customers with the most economical set of services that they will find anywhere. We will not be undersold. We're the only identity as a service provider offering governance and API security as well. So if you also happen to want protection of your web services that you expose to your customers, then we can factor that into the equation as well, and we can run and operate a solution to that from the AWS cloud. This solution is integrated with our own intellectual property for rapid partner federation onboarding. And so if you come to us and say, look, we have specific SaaS partners, nobody does this today, can you rapidly onboard those for us so that we can federate to them? Absolutely. We can even get really, really creative around onboarding some of your partners who may not even have a SAML stack. They may be very, very small and they don't have the infrastructure or the expertise, but we have some IP called last mile integration that in a matter of an hour can get them federating with your organization even without a commercial federation stack. So that's something that we do as a separate thing. And finally, we're the only vendor who brings that expertise both in IAM security as well as the cloud. And we blend those two together to bring you a service that is second to none with that expertise blend. So key takeaways: identity as a service is a reality. It's here today. It's mature. It's available now from 8K Miles. It is built on amazing foundations from CA Technologies. It scales as per your needs, and it provides a much, much quicker ROI compared to on-premise alternatives. Now with that, I'm going to very, very quickly run through some slides which show a sneak peek at our next generation UI. And I'm not going to dwell on them because it's 10 to the hour. And as I run through these, I'm going to read out one of the questions that we've had internally, and I'm going to answer that. So the first question says, basically, what about support for legacy applications that we may have on premise? So I kind of alluded to that in the presentation. Basically, we have something that's a wizard called Connector Express. Connector Express allows an administrator to run this tool, to reach out to an LDAP repository or an ODBC database that your application may store its users in. We can explore the schema, and we can very, very quickly generate a connector on the fly so that we can then provision to and from that application, on-premise application, in a matter of an hour. And there's no coding. There's no C, there's no C++, there's no Java, there's no JavaScript, there's no .NET. This is all a wizard-driven process where we do this through a tool, and it kind of pops out a pre-configured connector, provisioning connector that we can then use with EzIAM and immediately begin creating a role for that endpoint, assigning that role to users, and then having them be provisioned and deprovisioned to and from that application. Okay. Second question here is how to choose between SaaS and an on-premise IAM, which is kind of interesting because obviously we've been advocating the cloud-based approach. But let me go through a few pros and cons. So, if you want to go the route of an identity as a service, such as EzIAM, then I would say that would be for 3 or 4 main reasons. One is that you're limited, or you have no in-house resources who can manage an identity management stack. Another one would be that you really have no time to set up an on-premise infrastructure, hardware and software that's required to support an on-premise IAM stack, because I'll tell you, these things will typically, in a load balance mode, you know, a full stack can demand 10, 15, 20 different servers just to support that implementation. Another reason is if you don't want to run and operate an IAM implementation. So basically, you don't have the subject matter expertise. You don't want to hire those people who can be very, very expensive, and you don't want to train people from scratch, which can take a long time. Another reason is that you're willing to forego pre-configured capabilities and pre-configured workflows so that it will accommodate 80 to 90% of the customers. On the other hand, you're looking for extensive customizations, then what we're talking about is really more of an on-premise approach. And then finally, no, well, I think that's probably enough for cloud-based. If you're looking for on-premise, that would be because you have an extensive IT infrastructure who can run and operate and manage that IAM stack. You want to have full control of your IAM stack and the associated data with it. And finally, you want advanced workflows. You have some very creative integrations with on-premise systems that require customizations. And you want to build out a whole, bunch of integrations with connectors that you don't have. So you want to have maybe custom developed connectors, not just the connector express ones that we can pop out in a matter of an hour, but maybe you have other types of applications that have more complicated integrations with web services and other things like that require true coding and true custom developed connectors. So those would be more of the reasons why you would want to go the on-premise route, to give you that kind of degree of flexibility. So right at the top of the hour, so I think that's kind of it on the questions. So thank you very much for your attendance. Really appreciate that. Hopefully it was of benefit. We will make sure that the deck gets put online. And if you have any specific questions, contact Ed Howard or Ben Rudy, whose information is up on the screen now. So thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.